Hi, everybody. This is Arlo Gilbert, co-founder and CEO of Osano, a leading data privacy management platform. And you are listening to the Privacy Insider Podcast. This show explores the past, present, and future of data privacy for privacy and business leaders alike, as well as anyone who wants to keep privacy top of mind. Hello, my name is Arlo Gilbert. I'm the founder at Osano, a leading data privacy platform. And today I'm your host on the Privacy Insider Podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. Tehilla Shwartz Altshuler. Dr. Shwartz is a senior fellow at the Israeli Democracy Institute, an independent research center dedicated to reinforcing Israeli democracy. She is a technology, law, and policy expert addressing the challenges and opportunities stemming from the information, surveillance, cyber, and artificial intelligence revolutions, especially their impact on democracy. Dr. Shwartz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, as you know, we love to always start our conversations off learning a little bit about the person that we're talking to. And I think that your story is very interesting. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about how you got into privacy, digital surveillance, technology rights, I know I would love to understand more about that.
So I actually began this journey in academia, Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and then Harvard Kennedy School. And it's funny because my doctoral thesis was about media ownership concentration, which sounds, very boring, but it was about power, who gets to shape what we read, what we see, what we know. And honestly, my career has kind of evolved in parallel with the digital revolution itself. At first, I was asking, what do we need to change in traditional communications law, like gag orders, protection of sources, election propaganda, freedom of information. And I moved a little bit into open government, and from there it was almost inevitable that I'd move into data and privacy because suddenly the battleground wasn't just newspapers and television anymore; it was digital platforms and databases. And then came social media, and later what I call cyfluence, cyber influence, the way people and opinions are manipulated online. And obviously there came AI and entered into the picture, and I found myself asking not just how people use data, but how machines use data about people and what that means for democracy, for privacy, for other human rights. So in fact, my recent book is literally called People, Machine, and the State. When I returned to Israel after 5 years in Brookline, Massachusetts, I taught at the Hebrew University School of Public Policy, but all of a sudden I realized that academia alone was too detached from the messy reality, and I love to influence the messy reality. So I joined Israel Democracy Institute, which is Israel's biggest think tank on public policy. And I built there my kingdom, it's called Democracy in the Information Age. And it spans the entire spectrum from media to technology, ethics, policy, regulation, legislation of both media, telecom, and technology. And also what I've been doing during the past, let's say, 2 years or so, is that I teach at the Geo Institute in Mumbai, which is a data sciences institute in India. And there I get to talk with Indian students about AI and social media policy. So yeah, I combine research, policy, teaching, a little bit of public speaking. I wanted to become a public intellectual. I wasn't sure exactly how, but here I am.
That's amazing. And I got to tell you, honestly, the most important thing I picked up from that was that you spent time in Brookline. And my memory is that is where some of the absolute best lox and bagels in the entire Boston area come from.
Well, I agree. I really miss Brookline. There's that sentence in one of the children's books called Sarah Plain and Tall. Wherever you are, there's always something to miss. So, this is what I miss, Brookline, Massachusetts.
Indeed. And you spend a lot of time traveling. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just completed a very interesting project that I did with a German colleague and India, of course, other places as well. But I'm located in Jerusalem.
And can you tell us the kind of very broadly, what is the general theme of your research?
It's the question, I think, how technology affects reality, how technology is going to change power relationships, how human rights are going to need to be reframed. And I think specifically regarding the right to privacy, it is very prominent because, at around, I think, 2016, when I wanted to start my deep research in Israeli privacy law. One of my bosses told me, "Why won't you write something else about freedom of speech or freedom of the press?" And I said to him, I have this gut feeling, this hunch that the right to privacy is going to become maybe even the mother of all human rights. Because if there's no privacy, there's no autonomy. You can't talk about free elections. You can't talk about anything at this world. And when the world became so data centered, all of a sudden, this right um, needed some new interpretation, a new meaning, and also new attention. And this is where I am.
I love it. And, great minds think alike. I think a lot of people around that era in 2016 who were really paying attention to the writing on the wall started noticing, the European movement towards privacy rights. And I think you were exactly right. And that's the reason that I started Osano was for exactly the same reason. It just felt like privacy was becoming more and more important to society and more and more important to businesses and individuals. So, super interesting how you ended up there. Now, you got your degree at the Harvard Kennedy School. Is that correct?
I did my postdoc there under the supervision of the late Professor Fred Schauer. He was a First Amendment professor. But think about the fact that that was really the early days of the internet. So since then, so much has happened.
And if you had to choose purely based on weather, are you a Boston gal or are you an Israel gal? Because those are
Uh,
very different climates.
it's true. So it's both the weather and the food, I have to admit. The food in Israel is great, but Israel has its deficiencies. I don't need to be too precise about that. Anyone who opens up the news can understand that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Israel. So, Israel just passed a new privacy law, isn't that right?
Yes,
Yeah, and I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about that. I know a lot of our audience spends most of their time on the European GDPR, on California's Privacy Right Act, but Israel is a powerful economy, and everybody who's involved in privacy really needs to understand Israel's privacy laws.
yes, I think you're right. So Israel's privacy legislation was first passed at 1980. So, it's quite old in terms of updated privacy legislation. I think the most advanced technology that is mentioned in this old legislation is paper mail or so. Or direct paper mail. So, in this sense, there was an urgent need to update the privacy law. The problem is that it took a lot of time. Now, since the GDPR was introduced, other countries needed to create some kind of an adequacy with this legislation. Even America had to do that. And in this sense, there was a lot of pressure on the Israeli decision makers to start amending or updating the privacy law. So Israel has just passed Amendment 13 to its privacy law, and I was deeply involved throughout the legislative process. They say nobody should ever see how sausages or laws are made, but in this case, despite the political tension in Israel, not to say political deterioration, the process actually worked remarkably well. There was real cooperation between legislators and the Ministry of Justice and civil society organizations like mine and even the industry. So that in itself is a small miracle in our current climate. And the law is truly an earthquake for Israel's privacy landscape. For the first time, it creates a new professional role, what we call DPOs, data protection officer, just like in the GDPR. So suddenly we have a brand new privacy profession in the market, and there are a lot of courses going on now, and people want to take upon themselves this new role. It also introduces financial penalties for privacy violations, and this is something we've never had before. So until now, breaching privacy in Israel had almost no price tag. So this is like a dramatic step forward in aligning with international standards, especially GDPR, and that's important for a small market like ours. We must stay compatible with the GDPR. But that said, the law is far from perfect. It's essentially technical, it's enforcement focused. So Israel's privacy framework still relies almost entirely on consent as the as the gateway for data use. And you know that in today's world, consent is sometimes I call it the biggest laundering machine of our generation. Nobody really reads, nobody understands, nobody can understand. Everyone clicks. I agree, or I accept. So until the law is updated again, which may take a long time, this will remain a serious weakness. So, in other words, Amendment 13 is a progress, a very nice progress. I'm very proud of being part of it, but it is progress with patches, and patches always come with holes.
So a very good law, as they say, leaves everybody involved in drafting it as equally dissatisfied.
Yes.
Um, I'm curious, Israel, Israel is a young country and it was formed on the heels of the Holocaust. Did in your experience, is that societal fabric of the foundation of Israel, is that woven into the privacy conversations that were being had when this law is being drafted, or was it being kind of arm's length as like, look, we're a first world country. We need to have excellent regulations that protect our citizens from surveillance. I'm curious to just hear a little bit about the process and how that might have informed things.
I would say that I think, like any other political question, this could be dealt with from two sides. On the one hand, you would say Israel is a very close, of a or maybe the fabric of Israeli society is like um, being done or being built with very close connections between people. Israelis are very, very friendly. They're close to each other. Our Friday night dinners are what you Americans sometimes have only once a year in Thanksgiving. So in this sense, the Israeli society is really close, so no secrets. People are not used to have a lot of privacy. They used to have to sit very closely to each other on the buses. They used to tell everyone everything and so on and so forth. On the other hand, if you mentioned the Holocaust or you mentioned totalitarian regimes and so on and so forth, um, surveillance and lack of privacy is one of the, I think, preconditions for such regimes. And in this sense, I think there is a lot of fear, at least, in my social circles, from over surveillance by the government, from using micro-targeting based on data in order to change public opinion, democratic deterioration generally, which is based on lack of privacy. So I would say that this is kind of a mixture of everything that we carry on our backs.
It's really interesting. Yes, I was Shomer Shabbos for years when I lived on the East Coast, and I definitely miss challah on Friday nights and the time down. It is a key piece of being Jewish, and I've got to imagine that Israeli society must be so nice and supportive to be Jewish there. Um, so that's really interesting. So you're part of drafting this regulation, and it's now in effect. So Israeli citizens have protections similar to the way that Europeans do. And
almost.
one of your focuses on how the regulatory approach to new technologies that you're seeing in the US and the EU is not a great fit for a lot of other countries. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And so let me just say that, here in Israel, we are thinking from the perspective of a very small market. We always say to ourselves, we can't be more rigid than the EU, because then digital platforms would, bluntly tell us, thank you very much, but we are not interested in delivering services to your market. It's too small and it's too problematic. So when I started actually getting more interest in what's happening in India, which is, almost the third biggest economy in the world. All of a sudden, I realized that there's something really um, similar between India and Israel, and you can't really compare them. The scale is so different, the size of the population, the economy, the market, as I said, but there were some surprising similarities, societies that thrive on innovation and entrepreneurship, and emerging markets with unique languages and cultures. And as I said before, not always encourage strong privacy norms, and also, relatively weak democratic and regulatory institutions. And then I ask myself all the time, where do countries like Israel and India position themselves between what we call the Brussels effect that everyone talk about and the Washington effect, which is more of a, I would say, a laissez-faire kind of an approach, specifically in the federal level. So, what I try to do is together with an Indian colleague called Rajan Luthra, was to actually ask ourselves how or what should we do if neither model really fits us, because the American approach is too permissive and too weak in protecting civil rights, and that could be like a real problem for democracies like Israel's and India's. And the European approach, on the other hand, it's really too rigid, too heavy for fast-moving innovation ecosystem, for smaller markets, and so on and so forth. So what we came up with was something in between, and we called it the Mumbai and Tel Aviv effect. And that's a third way of regulation, which on the one hand might protect rights more than the US model, but leaves more room for innovation rather than the EU model. And I think that the fact that we rooted or deliberately rooted this idea in the lived realities of our two countries, it made it more, I would say, more substantive, not that theoretical. So what we actually suggested is something that we call a framework law. And that means legislation that doesn't spell out every detail of every technological approach, or every doesn't try to regulate any technology, but rather sets principle and ties liability to compliance with technical standards. By that, I mean, for example, let's talk about, I don't know, protecting the cyber of supply chain or the cybersecurity of supply chain. You can say, if you adopt this and this technological standard, then if there is a cyber attack, we are not getting into your computers and we are not going to fine you or see you liable. So it could be like, data set or databases management. It could be cybersecurity, as I said. It could be safeguarding AI application. If a company aligns itself with the relevant standards, technological standards and international technological standards, then in case of failure, it is protected. And the advantage is that the law doesn't need constant rewriting. It's the standards that would evolve. And in this model, technological standardization becomes the golden key. It's industry driven, it adapts quickly, it keeps regulation aligned with the pace of innovation. And crucially, it also gives countries like Israel and India the flexibility to decide in which fields they want to require strict adherence to technological standards, and in which fields, we can prepare or give more leeway, allow them to navigate their own path between the European and the American approaches. And this idea of technical standardization as the key for regulation in, this very fast-moving technological era, I think it could could be used by other countries as well, but it could definitely be, the third way that we were looking for.
And in Israel specifically, under Amendment 13, so you have this framework approach. Does what body in Israel is responsible for evolving those standards and for keeping up with the standards, since they're defined separately from the regulation itself?
So in this sense, my approach is really passive, because if you look at NIST in the United States, you look at SENS and ELEC in the European Union, you know that they're working very hard on creating technological standardization. Even ISO also does the same thing. So in this sense, I don't think that the Israelis need to, to invent anything. They just need to translate current international technological standards to Hebrew. And I think that would give the standardization that we want. That would help us actually, be more adequate with what is happening in other countries. And I think that the AI Act that the EU kind of adopts this approach as well, but in a much more strict and rigid way. So what I'm trying to say here is that Israel can have its own regulation as long as it is framework regulation that adopts international technological standards. But then Israel can decide in which fields it wants to create this framework regulation. But this way you can actually keep up with what is happening in the rest of the Western world or Eastern world when we talk about India. And at the same time, decide for yourself what types of priority you want to adopt when it comes to protecting your own industry, your own people, your own democracy.
Well, and think one of the things I love about this standards-based approach is that, especially with things like AI, we're seeing the pace of innovation move faster than anything I've ever seen in my entire life. I can't imagine a room full of regulators trying to sit around and keep pace with that, with new laws. Even maintaining standards around such a fast-moving technology is likely very challenging. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is the biggest deficiency of the EU AI Act is the fact that they tried to foresee technologies and therefore those their approaches are not going to be suitable to the to upcoming technological advances. On the other hand, I trust the industry to create standards much faster than I trust regulators to do so. So if we have the incentive that is being given by regulation to the industry to create its own standardization, that I think could be the only way to cope with the problem of this very fast-moving technology.
Well, and we opened the Pandora's box of fast-moving technology, and I know that's an area where you spend a lot of time thinking. And a lot of the technology regulation right now is focused on how organizations are using data today. But technology obviously doesn't stand still. So, in your work, what sorts of future challenges in tech policy have you found? We're talking about the difficulty of keeping pace, and there's a lot of interesting stuff out there that a lot of people haven't even heard of yet that we have to be thinking about, both from a regulatory and from a societal perspective. And you've done some really interesting research in that area. I'd love to hear some more about that.
Okay, I'm happy to share it because this is really a project that I'm particularly happy about. I think that sometimes we privacy people tend to over focus on data sets and databases and how we collect data, and we forget real world problems. So in this sense, all of a sudden I started realizing that every time you see Mark Zuckerberg, he's wearing or showing up with smart glasses on his face. And he's obviously not alone. You talk about Samsung and Xiaomi and Google, and they're all racing to make these next a big platform, maybe a substitute for smartphones. And I started researching smart glasses, and I realized that they don't just see what you see. They have three kinds of eyes: outward to the world through their cameras, inward to our bodies to see our reactions to everything that we see, and then networked into the cloud or into the internet. And this is thrilling because it's the world of post-smartphone reality, and I call it phygital reality, like physical and digital combined, because it's not the internet behind screens anymore. We are going to go out to the physical world with those new layers of reality that are being predicted by the smart glasses. And here I conducted a collaboration between Israeli and German and Finnish partners, but they were not policy makers or policy researchers or lawyers. They were industrial designers, because I felt that when we start talking about smart glasses, I can say it's privacy by design. Everyone says that, but when there are no designers in the room, what does it mean? What does it mean? Usually it collapses, all this privacy by design thing, it collapses into filling out compliance templates. But design is about so much more. It's about shaping experiences, imagining futures, researching interactions, asking uncomfortable questions. And this is exactly what I tried to capture. And the problem is that smart glasses are not that widespread yet. So the question of how do you think about near future questions has become like an interesting one. So what we did was to use role-playing games. So I found myself moving from being a policy expert into being a dungeon master of a speculative future. And that shift really mattered to me, because only through this imagination and play could we really see where the cracks in our legal frameworks lie. Because abstract values like privacy, transparency, responsibility, they aren't enough on their own. We need to think in terms of interactions like person to person, person to space, person to platform. So what really emerged in our, role plays is how smart glasses blur the line we've always assumed between private and public. Because, privacy belonged in private spaces. This is where you have the expectation or reasonable expectation for privacy. And then in public spaces, it was normal that people could recognize us and on the street or know where we've been and all of that. But smart glasses changed that completely, because imagine walking down the street and someone's glasses don't just see your face, they pick up that you're exhausted or anxious or maybe unwell or sick or not vaccinated, or I don't know. Or picture a casual cafe where someone can download an app called Undress the Waitress, and then you can create this deep fake of the waitress naked, but she doesn't know who downloaded this app yesterday. So all these are speculative exercises, but they force us to ask what happens when our emotional state and our dignity and even our bodies become visible in the public space or in the public arena in ways we never consented to. So in this sense, we have composed all kind of recommendations for new regulations, for new governing spaces, who is responsible to what happens in the public digital space. Is it the municipality or federal government? Is it the platform? Is it us? Can we actually consent to such things? All those, became very, very interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the tech stack that most people use today, right? We have a computer, we have a phone. And if I'm going to take a picture of you, even if it's in a public space, you usually have a pretty good clue that I'm doing that, right? I hold my phone up, I angle it. You might hear a clicking sound with the camera that goes off, and they're all clues that you're being recorded. Something's happening right now. But with the glasses, it really feels like there's a new wave of problems because there's no indication that you are doing things like you talked about with the imaginary app that undresses the waitress. The scary part about that is that the waitress doesn't even know this is happening. What did you come to any conclusions during your research about likely paths to things like consent? And did you form any opinions about where this would go?
So yes, we had a lot of policy recommendations that we think needs to be, addressed. First and foremost is how do we create new relationships between people, between one person to another in the public space. We need to rethink the right to privacy in this sense, because the right to privacy usually doesn't exist, or doesn't exist that, in such depth in the public space. And who is going to govern the app store for the glasses? Because actually they're going to work just the same like smartphones. You're going to have the hardware, then the operating system, then the app store. So maybe it can be regulated via the app stores that would not allow to offer such apps, or should it be the responsibility of the municipality, or the train station owner, or maybe the school principal? So what we have also came to understand is that we will need to recreate what we call the public sphere. We will need to differentiate um, between different types of public spaces. And all of these needs to be, I think, or needs to get regulatory attention at the moment, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves with, a widespread use of smart glasses, and no rules and no restrictions. And this is not going to be, a comfortable world to live in. And I think, Brandeis and Warren, who thought about the right to privacy, 100 years ago, obviously did not imagine that, but they did imagine what happens in the public space when someone walks with a camera. So in this sense, I think we need to get back to thinking this interactional, relational way of, or line of thought, and not only about what to do with the data, or what to do with the data sets, and all of those questions. So just to make a long story short, what we really wanted was that our children would stop staring at the screen and would go out to play, right? But now they'll go out to play with smart glasses. And what is going to happen then? This is where I think near future thinking is so necessary.
Yeah. And, this isn't so different than a lot of the closed caption television debates that have occurred in the past. And I'm curious how you see those as being similar or significantly different.
I think there are similarities, but we need to understand that the depth and the abilities, or inferences abilities of machines um, are making a difference. So if in the past no one could actually say, let's say from a distance, that I'm furious or tired or anything like that, they can do that today. And think about you walking the street. Um, and someone comes, on the other hand, on the other side of the road, and you say to yourself, "Oh, he has a beautiful T-shirt. I'd like to buy one like this." And you ask the glasses, which is great, and then you say to yourself, "He looks really nice. Maybe I should go and start a conversation." But then I wanna check a little bit about him. Is he vaccinated? Is he Jewish? Is he I don't know, anything like that. Does it look nice, friendly? And in this sense, we have kind of based on our own senses and our own abilities to make those judgments. And all of a sudden, the machine is going to do that for us. In what way is it going to change relationships between people? So that's slightly different from what I would say our ancestors, imagined or anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen those shifts happen in areas like online dating, right? I mean, online dating, dating used to be a very personal thing where you met somebody to make the decision about whether or not you would like to see them again and get to know them further. And the Bumbles and the Tinders and all the swipe left and swipe right apps have really compressed that discovery cycle. And it sounds like this smart glasses approach is only going to further compress that, because now I don't have to look and make a decision and read your profile. Instead, my smart glasses just tell me instantly, he's Jewish, he's nice, but he has a bankruptcy in his past.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Those are the billion eyes, that are connected to the smart glasses. And I think that the difference between all those, dating apps, for example, and smart glasses is that the dating apps are happening in the internet. You have the ability to decide whether you want to move them into the real world, right? So we usually used to say whatever happens in the internet remains in the internet, right? But all of a sudden, this is why I call it a phygital reality. It is going to be totally mixed. You're going to go out to the physical world wearing those glasses, and that could change both relationships between people, but also the relationship between you and the physical world around you. Think about it, that you won't need any kind of traffic signs or traffic lights or any kind of signs telling you when the next train is coming. The glasses would show it to you personally. So in what sense the physical world is about to change, or to to be re-engineered because of smart glasses. This is something I find fascinating. And what's most important here is the fact that it's really happening very fast. The technology behind smart glasses is what is actually allowing it to be now something that is, a very close profit, or a very short time prophecy, or plan for big techs, unlike, let's say, the cemetery where the Google Glass were buried in a decade ago.
You mentioned Google Glass, and I'm glad you did, because if you remember, they had a nickname for anybody who wore them. I think it was a glass hole. And I remember reading news about people who would wear those and they'd go somewhere public, maybe a bar or a cafe, and there was actually violence against people for wearing those, because individuals felt like I don't want you recording me and taking snapshots surreptitiously and learning about me without having to have asked me. And I'm curious. So, we look back at that Google Glass experiment, and clearly the technology was not ready, and society was not ready. Do you feel like that's changed? Do you think that if people wear these smart glasses, that will become a socially acceptable and social norm that we need to begin bracing ourselves for, or do you think there's a chance that nobody's willing to put these on?
So that's an excellent question, actually. And I think that this is like a classic privacy paradox here, because on the one hand, a lot has happened since a decade ago. We know that that we are being surveilled all the time. We know that the depths of the knowledge of the data that companies have on us is widening, and it can be processed into unbelievable results. On the other hand, sorry, I think that the awareness towards privacy has changed dramatically. There was this kind of a market education here, which we can see We could have witnessed that during COVID with surveillance technologies, and we could have seen it with a lot of awareness and legislation around the world. And in this sense, I think something interesting is happening because we will accept smart glasses now. If we put earbuds, like the new Apple earbuds in our ears, which can actually monitor our heartbeat, we will wear smart glasses. But on the other hand, I think that the call for regulation, for helping us, protecting us when we go out to the street, this call is going to be stronger. And I want to be ready when this call comes because I want to come with all different kinds of recommendations of how to do it, how to look at it, what types of questions we need to ask.
Interesting. And you've done some additional research on some topics that are pretty fascinating. So I know recently you completed some research, people managing people through machines. We talk about acceptance, we talk about AI, we talk about consent. I'm interested in understanding what you saw in terms of the growing use of AI systems in managing workers and workplace relations, because this is a whole nother topic where the level of consent is different. There are different regulations governing employer-employee relationships. What did you learn and what did you find?
So first of all, that the HR profession is changing dramatically because sometimes when we talk about the intersection of AI and workplace, we ask ourselves, is my job going to get obsolete, right? Or am I going to lose my job? Or can I use ChatGPT while I do my job? But my project was a little bit different because I explored how people are or how employees are increasingly being managed through a machine, how AI systems are shaping the entire journey of employees from hiring to promotion to dismissal. It all started during COVID when people started to work remotely. And then employers wanted to see my mouse clicks or how many windows were open on my screen or how fast I have responded to emails and what my sentiment was. So it all started there. But all of a sudden, when we think about agents and we think about different ways to assess productivity, this is a place I think that we should start thinking of or looking at that. And one of the things that I found in my research, in my recent research, was another privacy paradox. Because when we spoke with senior managers or with HR managers, they talk about privacy as a top priority. As I said, the market education here was amazing. But at the same time, often they deny employees, for example, the right to access to their own personal data or the right to correct this data or to erase this data. So we see some kind of a paradox here. What we also, I think, found was the fact that people are thinking a lot about privacy and about cybersecurity of employees' data, but they don't take enough, I think, consideration to what's next, which means decision making by machines, inferences that can be very deep in their abilities to understand employees' emotions. The switch from human consideration to machine decision making. All those types of questions seems to be unanswered at the moment, and I think that anyone who works on this, intersection of work and privacy should be aware of the fact that that's going to be our next mission or our next aim, to start resolving or creating those new contracts in workplaces where employers can know so much more about their employees. Employers can change behavior of their employees. Employers don't need to get any kind of decisions about the employees because the machines are making them. So in this sense, there's still a lot to do. But one thing that was really fascinating to me in this project, and this is going to be actually my, I think, next research project, is the rise of digital twins of employees, like human digital twins of employees. That they do that in medicine in order to try or simulate all kind of new medicine on a specific person. But I think that workplace will be the next frontier where employers start building digital replicas of their workers. For example, to run salary simulations, to train them, even to send them into meetings when they can't be there in person. And you can imagine many more scenarios. So I will focus exactly on this because just like with smart glasses, it raises profound questions not only about privacy, but also about identity, philosophy. Do I have a right to privacy over my digital twin? What are the limits of an employer's prerogative to use it? And in the end, where do you bury the twin when the employee leaves the company? So I think there is some industry growing startups, let's say Hagen and other startups like that. They are no longer focused on, generic avatars or agents, but on creating precise replicas of real identifiable people. And that makes this, I think, one of the most intriguing and urgent privacy debates we're about to face. So, this is going to be for our next meeting.
And to somewhat wind this down, one of the themes that it sounds like is coming through in your research is this kind of excessive focus on privacy, right, to the detriment of paying attention to this very near term, in the next couple of years, significant AI shifts that need to be happening. Is there anything that you would recommend that privacy professionals or compliance professionals do to avoid getting stuck with their nose in the book, I guess to say, and instead focusing on the consequences and challenges that are coming up soon that they might not be prepared for?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think about myself not as a futurist, but rather as a presentist. I think about when I think about what professionals need most today, I think that the skill of near future thinking is the most important skill. And we're not talking about 2050 scenarios because I have no idea what's going to happen in 2050. But I am talking about the next 3 years, even not 5 years, just next 3 years. And I think we all need to be aware of technologies that are already not in the lab, but in early adoption, and they will shape the reality our clients, our regulators, citizens live in. And I think for lawyers and for policymakers, this mindset is critical. And if you only react to problems once they're fully visible, you're already too late. We've seen that before. So if you want me to be more precise, I can say that from my research, I see 4 challenges that don't get enough attention. First is the deep inferences machines. I'm sorry, it's the deep inferences machine can make about us, not just what we say, but what can be predicted from patterns in our data and all of that. But it's very deep now. And second is the emotional layer. That machine don't just recognize our feeling, but influencing our feelings step by step, by microstep or behavioral microsteps. And third is the collapse of the old boundary between public and private spaces. This is what we talk when we talk about the smart glasses. And the fourth is the rise of digital twins, of human digital twins. This is going to be a major privacy challenge. And those are not abstract risks. They're real debates that are waiting to happen. And that's why I keep insisting, if you want governance that works, you need to stretch your imagination just a little further ahead. So privacy is important. It's only one piece of a much bigger puzzle, but we need to think about it at the moment.
Wow. I can't help but feel that I'm living in a Philip K. Dick science fiction novel when I talk to you, and I believe everything you say is going to come true, but it's just so hard to imagine what we can't see sometimes.
I know, but this is the present. It is not the future and it's not sci-fi. Look at Mark Zuckerberg. Just listen to him and you will see that everything I say is this is reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're all living in Mark Zuckerberg's world these
Yes.
days. So, we spend a lot of time as privacy professionals, as researchers focusing on ethics, thinking about the downsides and the negatives. And that can sometimes come across as a little bit of finger wagging or, listen to me, or I'm going to tell you why the answer is no. But one of the things that we have learned through the process of this podcast is that we're all human. And despite the fact that we may have academic and philosophical beliefs, we're still people. And so I'm really interested to understand, from your perspective, what are the things that you do that maybe you wouldn't recommend other folks do? Uh, do you mind sharing one?
Oh yeah, sure. But then I want to tell you a short story again, to tell that to show how very literate the people can get trapped. So first of all, I constantly tell people to protect their digital footprints, and I use the same 3 passwords across way too many platforms. And I always say to myself, just refresh them, change them. And what's so funny is that the passwords are actually made from the initials of my kids' names, blood all the time. And I joke to myself, who would have ever guessed that? Uh, but the other story I wanted to share with you is the fact that I was the subject of a spear phishing campaign. About 2 months ago, I received this very convincing emails from a well-known person in Israel, and I started chatting with him, and we have decided to create some kind of a Zoom meeting, and only really 2 weeks into this type of conversation did I realize that it was not him and it was a spear phishing campaign. And I said to myself, I need to work more slowly. I need to check, my emails more carefully. So when you approached me, Arlo, I said to myself, could this be real or is it another spear phishing campaign?
Well, I'm glad to share that I am real, but it does say something about the sophistication of those attacks. If somebody whose entire profession is focused on these kinds of topics can still find yourself, confused and tricked by some of these tactics that are used. They're very effective, and it's only going to get harder.
This is why I decided to share this story, in Israeli media and international media, just to tell everyone, be careful. If it happened to me, it would happen to all of you guys.
Well, Dr. Schwartz, thank you for joining today. And if you're interested in learning more about her research, I highly encourage you to go over to Google or Bing or Brave Search, whatever you use, and type in the IPPSO project at the University of Potsdam. You will find it as the first result. It's the IPPSO UC lab, and it's got a whole lot of interesting information about this smart glasses research and the smart glasses project that Dr. Schwartz was sharing with us today. Dr. Schwartz, thank you for joining us. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Privacy Insider Podcast. You can find a full transcript of this episode and any show notes at osano.com. That's www.osano.com. And while you're there, get access to an excerpt of my book, The Privacy Insider: How to Embrace Data Privacy and Join the Next Wave of Trusted Brands, which is now available on Amazon for purchase. Until next month, take care. And remember, data privacy is a fundamental human right, y'all.